Unlike most kids, William grew up under the strangest circumstances. He lives in the city of the undead, devoid of humans, where he was raised by a mummy, a zombie, and a ghost. What's even more curious about this is that he's born with vague memories from his past life and how he's determined to not live like he did back then. But how will this affect the life he's living right now? And for what purpose will he serve in this world? Our story begins with the end, as our hero's consciousness starts to fade and he's now engulfed in darkness. The funny thing about being in the dark is that it forces you to think about things you tried so hard to forget. In his case, our hero thought about the mistake he made and how it messed up a portion of his life that made him live like he's in stagnated water. If that wasn't bad enough, day-to-day life was a struggle, and as much as he wanted to look forward to the next day, he simply didn't have the energy to do so. The people around him treat him like some kind of tumor, and if he's being honest, it would have been much better if they blamed me. In his final moments, our hero thought about how painful it was to be alive, but he didn't have the resolution to die. Thinking about all of this made him mutter to himself how he was better off dead, and as if his prayers were heard, his consciousness started to fade. On his last string of consciousness, he felt like he faintly saw a lamp, and then there was nothing. This isn't exactly the happiest of intros out there, but we're getting there, trust me. This time, let's start with a tale as old as time. Long ago, in time immemorial, before the world could take form, it was nothing but a large pool of mana akin to muddled chaos, unable to maintain its own shape. From there appeared the very first god, who said just one line, "Let there be earth." As soon as the god said that, the mana on his feet turned to earth, while the mana over his head turned into the sky. Despite being the first god responsible for the creation of the earth, this god's name remained unknown, which is why he was only referred to by many names like Creation God. And this is when the storyline gets interrupted by a young boy asking the storyteller, Gus, if the story really started there. With a mixture of bored and impatient looks on the child's face, he complains about how he wants to know the connection between words and magic. And yup, you guessed it. This is our story's hero. William, back to the topic. Gus reprimands him and tells him to shut up, with the former stressing that words and magic are closely related to one another. Through words, God created the sun, followed by the moon. The element of fire came next, followed by the wind. And not long after that, the trees, plants, and animals soon came to be. Seeing all of his creation, God was satisfied and muttered, "Good." However, for good to exist, there was a need for evil, thus malice and the evil god were born. According to Gus, it's impossible to take back words once spoken, even if they are from a god. And so the creation god suffered. From all this came life and death, which also marked the beginning of the Age of Gods. We'll listen to all of this intently as he asked Gus if magic, which was words that created the world, was used, to which Gus affirmed it was so. The older man added that there is power in the symbols correlating with the words of creation. To let the little man understand better, he used an example. Gus started scribbling something using his fingernail, and then suddenly, a fire appeared that caught Will off guard. Gus proceeded with his lesson, saying that if he writes the symbols for Ignis, it will define the existence of fire, and if they want to put it out, he needs to layer on the words of creation to do so. This is what they call magic, but before he wrapped it up, he asked Will if the little man knew why there was such power in words. Cut to the next scene. Will is now outside, standing in front of a giant tree as he eyes a bird perched on one of its branches. The little man loads a pebble on his slingshot and hurls it toward the bird after aiming. In one swift move, the bird gets hit and falls to the ground. Will starts running toward it in great haste. As soon as he reached the bird, he grabbed it by the neck, and you know what happened next. With a sigh, he picked up the lifeless bird from the ground and put it on his knapsack as he started walking toward the forest when he passed by a large boulder. While looking at it, Will wondered why there was so much power in words and recalled the time he asked Gus about it when he was younger. At the time, he also wondered if the explanation involved the story of God, which the older man said was so. Will thought for a bit before his face lit up, and he asked Gus if it was seen the same way as how they perceive a chair. The older man was surprised but listened wordlessly as Will continued how. If they saw a four-legged wooden stool, they would still classify it as a stool no matter the color or how it was made. Simply put, Will tells his teacher that they already have a label for that four-legged stool. Back to the present, our little hero approaches the giant boulder carefully, and after some thought, he pulls his slingshot and drops his bag. Will took a deep breath, assuring himself that he'd be fine since this was just a small test, despite his intent on using this newly discovered word. At the same time, he remembered the continuation of that memory, of how he told Gus that they stick labels known as words to various objects to categorize them, making it easy to perceive and differentiate when it comes to arrangement. We'll believe that if they didn't do this, then they wouldn't be able to survive. As for the stool, when one sees this particular item, people don't normally go around calling it by what it's made of, which is a round plank and 4 sticks. However, he also adds that people may still see it differently if they choose to do so. And in line with this, Will believes that the previous myth about the creation God follows this logic. There is a power inside words to categorize the vague. With a bright smile, our little hero tells his teacher that words are the things that determine and define what the world is. Phew, that's a pretty long explanation, but you guys are still following it, right? So, back to Will and the big boulder. He braces himself and points toward the boulder with his fingers before crying out, "Divisa." As soon as he said it, the boulder split in half, making Will happy that it was successful until there was a loud crack, and he saw the other half of the boulder start leaning toward him. Everything happened so quickly that the next thing he knew, our little hero started running for his life as the boulder started rolling toward him. And of course, he had to take a tumble, rolling deep into the forest and landing straight into the pond. With a sigh, he already knew that he'd get an earful from Marie later. Speaking of later, Will returns to a rundown but well-maintained Victorian-style home. He goes in as quietly as he can, calling out Gus, Murray, and Blood in a small voice. Once he thought the coast was clear, he started moving in quicker, thinking that he could secretly go back to his room and change. Unfortunately, his body betrayed him as he felt a sneeze start to build up, and as soon as he released it, a giant red-haired skeleton popped up from behind to ask him how his hunting went. This made Will jump inside his bones, making him fall flat on his face as the skeleton laughed at what just happened to our hero. Will turns to him, calling him Blood, and asks the latter not to tease him anymore, to which the skeleton is quick to oblige. Now that's out of the way, Blood asked Will why he was wet, and after a pause, our hero answered that he fell off a cliff before handing over the small bag that contained that day's hunt. Blood took it and commented on how Will didn't have any serious injuries before proceeding to praise him for hunting 3 birds by himself. Satisfied with his haul, Blood suggested they surrender that to Marie first to prepare Will's meal, but our hero thought otherwise. They already started walking, then Will asked if he could change first, but Blood didn't think so. He told our little hero that he had to get his injuries checked first and receive Marie's lecture. This time, Will contends that it's not like he wanted to fall on purpose, to which Blood rebuts by explaining how he knows there aren't any ponds anywhere near the hunting grounds he designated for him. In line with that, the walking-talking skeleton pointed out that it only meant Will took a detour because he wouldn't have gotten himself wet and injured in the first place if he hadn't. Bullseye. Will answers him with a pout, while Blood only stares at him in reply. After a moment, the latter notices how the little man feels troubled because he still hasn't gotten used to taking another creature's life. Our little hero admits that he's not used to it and doesn't want to do it, a sentiment that Blood shared, but the latter also claimed that the birds he hunted were necessary food for Will to stay alive. It's a necessity, and the only thing they can offer the bird is to not let it suffer when they take its life. The talking skeleton even said that this is even more applicable in a battle of life and death. He says that if the situation calls for it, he urges Will to leave that mentality behind and finish his enemies off on reflex. If possible, Blood expresses his desire to teach Will how to become a warrior, which the latter already knew. The two spent a moment of silence looking at each other, or I hoped Blood's looking at Will with his hollow sockets before he patted the child on the head and told him that they should go ahead and get food, while our little hero nodded in agreement. And just as they predicted, Marie was distressed and worried as heck once she saw Will's condition, though the latter tried to brush it off with a dry laugh, claiming it was not all that bad. Marie doesn't think so, seeing there's blood in his injuries, so she hurries off, saying she'll patch him up real quick, while Will could only give her a sheepish apology. Just then, another voice sounded from behind, complaining about how noisy it was. It was Gus, floating in one corner and scolding our little hero. According to the old man, Will should be calmer now that he's almost 7, but the appearance of this old, ghastly man did nothing but excite our hero. Will gingerly walks up to him, asking the older man for a favor, if Gus could teach him magic tomorrow because he couldn't use the new word he learned. Upon hearing that, Gus's brows furrowed, and he asked the little man if he used a word without his permission. Will's reaction was a giveaway since he couldn't even deny it as his teacher scolded him again. Gus stressed for that time how Will must not use words freely since there is a danger that goes hand in hand with each use. Judging from Will's state, Gus already knew that the young boy paid a price for it, so this time, The old man lets him in on another important lesson. There's actually a way to accomplish things without the use of magic, and that's through using money. This time, it was Will's turn for his brows to furrow. While Gus continued that our little hero should just buy the equipment he needs to accomplish the thing he wants without using magics, since it's the safest and most peaceful method. Well, he's not wrong there, and I'd do him one better. Just hire other people to do it for you. But the young Will doesn't see eye to eye with Gus regarding this idea. Calling it Gus's money supremacy, he raises his voice to the older man, wondering aloud just why a ghost like him is so eager for money. On the other hand, Gus didn't even bat an eyelash when he said that the ability to earn money and use it is just as important as magic, which is so true by the way, but Will is too little to understand that. From there, the two started bickering even more, with Gus even saying that Will should try being a ghost like him. Unable to circulate his money, while our little one took offense at that. Just then, Marie returned and asked if something good had happened between the two, but she was only met with silence. Marie started treating Will's wounds shortly, telling him that he should practice doing magic when he's alone and stop doing reckless things. She was about to continue with the lecture, but Will cut her off with an apology, saying how he was sorry that he got her worried and promised to only do magic when Gus was around to supervise him. In return, Marie smiled at him, satisfied with his promise as she took his hands in hers, reminding Will to take care of his body since he's a human after all, as the little boy nodded. Enter the undead trio, Marie the mummy, Blood the skeleton, and Gus the ghost. These three undead beings are what make up Will's distorted and mysterious family. So I don't want to hear from all of you how you had it worse. Okay. Well, except for extreme cases, by now, you may be wondering why a human boy like Will is living with him. But the truth is, even he doesn't know it himself, and there's a whole lot of mystery surrounding his life too. But we'll get there in time. For now, let's let Will eat his meal. Marie prepared the birds our hero caught, along with a few vegetables and bread, as she urged him to eat. As Will sat at the table to feast, he was the only one to eat among all of them since the undead didn't really need food for nourishment. While holding the loaf of bread in his hand, Will asked Marie where she got the bread from. It was obvious the mummy didn't expect that question, but she still smiled sweetly at him as she told him that it was a secret. While eating his meal, Will thought to himself how each of these had their own secrets, probably too many to count, which include other mysterious things about their world. Just like any curious soul, Will also wondered why these guardians of his were undead and what words were. How come he's the only human here? Ever since his birth, our hero knows that almost 7 years have passed, but to this day, he still wonders who he is. This time, Will's got his eyes closed and his hands clasped together in prayer when he hears a voice saying that it's all right to open his eyes now. Our little hero opened his eyes to see the dark room illuminated by a large window and skylight, as stone pillars stood on each side. Statues stood at the wall recesses, and Marie looked at him with a smile. The mummy approaches him, praising him for how he has gotten so good at prayers, which Will wasn't sure it was so. Instead, he looks up the statues, asking Marie if those gods really exist, to which she confidently says that they do. What's more, she tells him that the day will come when he has to choose which god he wants to serve, and until his coming-of-age ceremony, he should think about what he should pledge to. Will only looks up to the statues in silence, thinking about how, in their world of many religions, there exist gods from long ago, and these are the most famous ones. World, the god of wind and communication, the Zolvia, the god of water and vegetation, and Light, the god of knowledge and creator of words, Volt, the god of justice and lightning, Mattel, the goddess of fertility that governs over the blessings of earth and family, and Blaze, the god of flames and techniques. As they exit the prayer hall, Will thinks about how these gods exist, and by directing faith toward them, you can gain some form of physical protection. As far as he knows, Blood's god is Blaze, while Gus's god is Whirl. He then proceeded to ask if the deity Marie serves as the goddess of fertility, Mattel. Marie said he was correct, then became quiet, prompting him to call out to her. But the mummy suddenly shifted the topic and asked our hero if there was any god he was interested in. He looks at her questioningly, wondering if something happened, before repeating her question to himself. In truth, our hero actually has a god he's already interested in and turned to look up to one more statue he didn't name before, Gracefield. Marie continues that Gracefield governs the cycle of life and death, lighting the path with a lamp and guiding one to their next life. Before they could mull over her, Marie suggests that they should head back, but not before Will looks over at Gracefield's statue one last time, echoing in his mind how this deity governs over the circle of transmigration and cycle of life and death. He wonders to himself if the reason he's so interested in Gracefield is because of his birth. Now that he's out of the prayer hall, Will stretches his arms wide, marveling at the scenery while at the same time thinking about how there are only ruins as far as his eyes can see. Just then, Blood's voice calls out to him from below with the talking skeleton, saying that Gus will keep him company in his battle training and that he already informed Marie about it, so they should go now. Now this got our little hero excited, asking Blood to wait for him as he hurried to come down. On the way down, Will thought about how, even though those three have their own secrets that they haven't told Will yet, he also has something that he hasn't told them yet. But first, he bids goodbye to Marie, who cheerfully sees him off while Will runs gleefully toward awaiting Blood and Gus. Our hero looks so happy and innocent that you never suspect what his secret was. But here it is. Will has memories of his previous life. The three went off somewhere a little farther in the forest, with Blood telling Will to be careful since the ground he was standing on was unstable. Meanwhile, our hero traversed through it quite easily, assuring the talking skeleton that he was fine. So let's talk about Will's secret. He has memories of his past life wherein his appearance and name from the past are much different from who he is right now in this world. But being reincarnated into a different world with memories from his past life is something our hero didn't fully grasp. The very first time he became aware of his surroundings, Will was beyond horrified to see how the first thing his eyes saw back then was a ghost, a skeleton, and a mummy looking down on him. As a baby, he let out the loudest cry, wondering where he was and who those three figures were. But there are other pressing matters to think about. Why couldn't he move? And how come he doesn't have any teeth? Our little hero puts his hands over his mouth to see if they aren't really there. And unfortunately for him, they're not. This sudden change, as well as this suspicious environment, only made him more afraid. And like most babies do, he was about to bawl his eyes out to cry for help when a hand gently pats his forehead. With tears still streaming from his eyes, Will looks up to see that the mummy is smiling and talking to him in an unrecognizable language. Will could only stare, having absolutely no idea what she was saying, but he was more surprised at the fact that they weren't going to take him away and eat him. Well, I've never heard of a mummy and skeleton eating flesh before, so that's kind of a wild idea. The undead trio continued to look over him, and that's when Will's eyes roamed around the place, taking in the unfamiliar sight as he tried to figure out why he was there. And in that same moment, he remembered that he died back then. Although he's not too sure about the specifics of his death, all he remembered was the agony that came with it. He then turned his attention to the three figures in front of him and deduced that they were not humans. No matter what angle you looked at them, they were moving corpses. Now it got him thinking that maybe this is the afterlife. If God exists, he thought that this was his punishment. This was something he couldn't understand. Was this his only punishment for his past life? We'd all know how the three took him in, and it was mostly Marie who greatly cared for and fed our hero as a baby, just like now when she busies herself feeding him and praising him for eating well. Since he still couldn't talk, Will could only grunt and exclaim in short syllables his wants, and for this instance, he wanted more food. After having his fill, he lets out a satisfied sigh as Marie asks if he's had enough. Soon after, the mummy starts to clean him up while Will ponders how it's been 186 days, or basically 6 months, since he started living with them. He's beginning to understand what they were saying, but on his side, he still couldn't express his thoughts properly, not to mention how his pronunciation's a bit off too. Just then, Mary picks him up and tells him that they'll be going out for a walk right after, an idea that got him so excited since he'll finally be outside. In his mind, he was asking her if she'd take him out, but all Marie could hear was baby talk, giggling to herself, seeing how Will looked so happy. Mary carried him into his arms, with Will excited at the prospect of seeing the world outside for the first time because, from what he has deduced so far, this world can't exactly be safe. According to the information he gathered from the past half year, it seems like their world is infested by fantasy-like creatures called demons, so the undead trio decided that it was far too dangerous to take Will outside, which was why he was all cooped up inside all this time. Looking at the place, Will noticed that it was pretty big, making him wonder if they were at a temple or some church, which made him realize one thing. Being a baby is so restrictive. He finds it so frustrating that he wasn't able to move as he pleased, or maybe this was also because he was born with memories of his previous life. But don't grow up properly, right? What? Then again, maybe this is another form of punishment. Our hero got pulled out of his thoughts at the sound of Marie calling him, as the latter told him that the breeze was nice today, so it was not scary at all. With that, she gripped the door handle and opened the door as the view of the mountains and greenery welcomed Will's eyes. Upon seeing the majestic view, Will started to cry so naturally that Marie tried to calm him and assure him that everything was fine because it was not scary. Little did she know, our hero had a different thought in mind. He found the place wonderful. Maybe it's because he was living vaguely and hopelessly back in his previous life, but Will really thought that living in their world was his punishment for being unfaithful and underestimating life. But looking at this view, even he knows that this is no punishment. This is forgiveness. He realized how the thing that he treated so nonchalantly was granted back to him by someone, leaving him overwhelmed. Marie continued to soothe him, caressing his cheek as she asked if the view was beautiful and calling him her adorable child. Our baby of a hero back then stretches his hand to the sky, vowing to himself that in this world, he'll live again. Now, back to the present. Will, Blood, and Gus finally reached the day's training grounds as the old ghost announced that they'd start Will's magic practice battle shortly. He laid down some ground rules, stating that once someone admits defeat, the match will end. In addition to that, he reminded them not to destroy the surrounding area too much, which Blood agreed to. Finally, we're about to get some action. Blood and Will were already locked in a gaze, just as Gus started the countdown, and once he signaled start, Blood went straight toward Will with a wide swing, which our hero evaded by jumping. As soon as he landed, he complained about how Blood was already out for him, but the latter reprimanded him, saying there's no such thing as signals or whatnot in a match. Blood quickly went after him with another swing, which Will barely evaded. So now Gus scolds him for being on the defensive. Is that all he was going to do? He was about to rebut, but he chose to put some distance between him and Blood, shouting acceleration as he did so. He glanced back at Blood, thinking that he needed to do this when the talking skeleton asked where Will was running off to. After creating some safe distance between them, Will puts his hand out and shouts Flomal and Agnes toward Blood, but the attack backfired as the flames licked our hero's hands. Gus scolds him and points out how his pronunciations are too inaccurate, while Will calls up from the smoke. Out of the blue, Blood appeared and tried to cut him down with a wide slash, forcing Will to return his attention to their fight. He couldn't believe his opponent charged through the fire. If he can't, well, I can. Dude, your opponent's a skeleton. Duh. Again, Will raises his hands and utters, Elenium, and as soon as he did, spider webs gush out of his hands, only for Blood to cut them off swiftly. As the talking skeleton charged straight at him, all Will could do was brace himself and close his eyes for the incoming attack, only to find that it never came. Blood flicks on his forehead instead, reminding him that he shouldn't close his eyes during a fight. Although it was just a flick, it contained so much force that our hero was blown black, the middle of his forehead sore as he finally admitted defeat. Blood, on the other hand, teases him in a sing-song voice about how Will still hasn't reached him yet. After the battle, Will receives Gus' lectures, beginning with how his pronunciation wasn't clear, and because our hero has talent. The floating ghost warns him that he may really explode one day if he doesn't regulate his precision. Our boy knew he was in trouble, sitting in Caesar like that, and even knew he was about to get some more if only Blood didn't butt in saying that it should be enough since the food will taste bad soon. But Gus doesn't think so, and is about to say something more about the guidance when Will's stomach starts grumbling. In the end, the old ghost caved in while our hero happily munched on his sandwich, saying how one can't fight on an empty stomach. Blood caught a word of that, but Will brushed it off and then changed the topic. He turned to Gus and asked if they could do something about the results of magic since they vary, but the former firmly answered no. To help him remember the process of activating magic better, Gus instructed Will to narrate to him the process of magic. Will did as the old ghost instructed, beginning with detecting the mana that their world consists of. Next, he must resonate mana within his own body and gather it before pronouncing the words of creation. These three are the basics of activating magic. Gus nodded in agreement and then explained that back then, he also wanted the produced results to be uniform, just like Will wanted, but there was a limitation to that. But before revealing what it was, the talking ghost asked Will first if he still didn't get it despite experiencing it practically. With the unbelievable calm of an almost 7-year-old, Will says he understands what Gus is saying. For starters, he knows that magic is not even and that the density of the mana differs depending on the area. Apart from that, our little hero also knows that the mana flowing through one's body isn't uniform either. Gus replied that it wasn't as if there were no tools to gather mana, but those items caught the opponent's attention. With that said, there's a demerit to being aggressively attacked during battle, and using those magic gathering tools will make it easier to see the starting points of magic. But anyway, Gus pointed that there is a limit to how much one can rely on a tool. Regarding words, he says that humans cannot express them twice, and in the end, It all comes down to relying on one's basic instincts to decide for themselves. When he heard that, Will couldn't help but comment on how scary it was, a sentiment that Gus also shared and stressed that magic is indeed scary. If our hero could understand that much, then he should practice, to which Will said he'd do his best. Suddenly, Blood puts his arm around Will, praising him for how amazing he is, then admits that he's bad when it comes to using his head. Gus scoffed and was about to comment on what Blood said, but the talking skeleton was quick to catch that. He was ready to jump the talking old ghost, and Gus was not one to back down from that. Meanwhile, Will's brows furrowed at the two's usual antics before he told them that Marie would get angry if they fought. As soon as they heard her name, the two flinched and dropped the banter just like that, leaving Will's mouth hanging open at the power Marie held over them like, dang, Marie on top. Blood was the first to break the silence again, asking and, at the same time, commending Will for the increase in the amount of magic he could use. Our hero tried to downplay the compliment since whenever he tried to use magic during fights, it failed him, but the talking skeleton insists that he's doing just fine. They can just all pin the blame on Gus because he's never had a disciple because of how peculiar he was. Upon hearing that, the talking ghost was quick to pick a fight and reasoned out that he didn't really see anyone with potential worth teaching. Will only listen to them bicker while Blood patted him on the head, encouraging the little one to have Gus teach him a lot of things. The talking skeleton continued to shower him with affection while commenting on how fast Will has been growing up. He's already almost 7 by this time, and it's as if he's growing up way too quickly. Gus chimed in and said that he was surprised when they picked up a human child back then, but he thinks that if they could teach Will a lot of things while he's still young, the little man could amount to something when he grows up. Gee, thanks for the backhanded compliment. Will only took a bite of his food, trying to hide his discomfort. But Gus didn't notice and continued to say how he initially thought of him as excess luggage, but the talking ghost got cut off by Blood himself. The talking skeleton confronted Gus, asking him what unnecessary comments he was spewing and telling him off for calling a boy who's barely 7 excess luggage. It didn't sit well with Blood when his older friend said that, and his very reaction came as a shock to Will, who only shivered in his seat as he sensed how the talking skeleton was pissed. However, Gus doesn't think there is anything wrong with what he said and is about to explain more on his side about teaching Will because of his potential, only for Blood to cut him off again. For Blood, that wasn't the issue, for one. He always knew that Gus had this kind of temperament, and he had no problem with that. He already accepted the talking ghost as he is, but he believes that Gus should stop that attitude if he's going to serve as a teacher to someone. If you think that was the end of it, it's not. Because Blood also pointed out that even Gus should know how it feels to be told those kinds of hurtful things. For all it's worth, Blood doesn't really care what Gus will say if it doesn't involve raising Will, but when it does, he thinks it's only fair to not say those kinds of things. Hearing Blood say all these, even Gus had to admit he was wrong, which is why he admitted that what he said was thoughtless, apologizing to Will and saying he'll be mindful from then on. Our little hero was quick to forgive him, saying he doesn't really mind, but Will was more surprised that the hard-headed Gus would actually apologize to him and get Blood angry, which was insane. On his side, Blood apologized to Gus too, saying how he impulsively threatened his old friend and acted rudely, but the latter only hummed, saying Blood's rudeness wasn't something new to him. Of course, that got Blood all rattled up, and thankfully, the awkward air dissipated within them. Will's training resumed throughout the afternoon, and by the time they wrapped up, it was almost sundown. With Will busy catching his breath, the talking skeleton told him that they'd done enough for today, so they should head back. However, he remembered that they were almost out of firewood, so he asked Will to come with him for a bit while Gus went ahead. After gathering a couple of dried logs, Blood said they got enough, with Will blowing his hand dry to clean off the dirt. The talking skeleton suddenly turned to him and told him that he wanted to talk for a bit before they headed back. Will agreed, and so the two sat in silence at the log nearby before Blood awkwardly began to explain their situation, saying that in the end, he just chose to get on with it. Blood pointed out how Will is different from the three of them, with the latter well aware that he's the only warm and breathing member of their group. The talking skeleton seems to be satisfied that Will gets it, and adds that a lot is going on right now that he can't fully explain yet. For that, he apologizes to our hero, to which Will only nods in agreement. He thinks that it's only natural that Blood's trying to avoid the topic since they can't really say outright how Will is a child they picked up, since it's like the equivalent of them confessing that Will's adopted. Which he is, technically speaking. Before he could ponder more about it, Blood told him that he shouldn't be too angry with Gus. The old man was simply like that and didn't think things through. He He's the type who doesn't think of his words wisely, and he also doesn't think before speaking, but Will said he's fine with that, although he did get surprised earlier. Once again, the talking skeleton patted him on the head, praising Will for having such a big heart, which is a good thing. Blood said that if he grows up as big as his heart, then our little hero could accept various things, a compliment that Will thanked him for. With Blood still ruffling his hair, Will thought about how amazing the talking skeleton was, and he knew that what the former did earlier was for him. Blood got up soon after, telling Will they should head back now. As he got up, our little hero knew that Blood was the type of person who cared a lot about Will just by looking at him. In his mind, it made Will wonder if he was able to do that for someone else as well. But if memory serves him right, he knows that he wasn't. Even now, there are moments when Will remembers a semblance of his past self from his previous life, which makes him feel a suffocating thought that binds his heart like a sludge. He quickly brushed these thoughts away, though, reminding himself that he'd be just fine because he's himself. However, Gus calling him excess baggage rang in his mind, just making him wonder where he came from. There are a lot of things he wants to think about, but he's sure of one thing. With that, he called Blood and hugged him hard from behind, catching the latter off guard and almost throwing him out of his balance. Will clung to him tightly while Blood asked if something was the matter, and more important than that, how dare Will launch a surprise attack when he was caught off guard like that? But our hero kept quiet, thinking about how Blood got angry with him when Gus called him excess luggage earlier. When Will spoke, he told Blood in a quiet voice how thankful he was for what he had done in several ways. The talking skeleton was quiet for a moment before responding that it was no problem, and if anything, he told Will that he was 100 years too early to aim an opening for him. And the two got into a scuffle after that. When the two got home later, Murray was fuming as she asked them why both of them were so dirty, all while Gus watched them get scolded from the side. So far, we've had his interactions with Gus and Blood, so that leaves one more undead to discover. It's another day at this ghost town, and for today, Will holds a reddened tomato in his hand, asking Marie if they could eat it since it's getting red. The mummy kneels next to him and tells Will that for the one he's held, it will be much better if they wait for it to ripen a little longer. Marie clarified that they could eat it now, but it would be much tastier if they waited until it was fully ripe and completely red. Well, he couldn't really argue with what she said, so now Will asks her if there's anything else she wants him to do there. Upon hearing that, Marie asked if he could till the ground where they would be planting the potatoes, which he gladly said he would do. Like the good filial son that he is, Will started tilling the ground well into the day until Marie suggested he wrap it up and head back, seeing how intense the sun was back then, which he said he would. Looking up at the sky, Marie commented on how time flew by so easily since they were already halfway through summer by then, with Will adding that it'll be the new year once the winter solstice comes. When that time comes, Will be 9 years old, which prompted Marie to wonder what kind of feast she'll prepare for him by then. Will only smiled, thinking about how this world starts each new year with the winter solstice, and that they don't have the custom of celebrating birthdays. What they do instead is add a year to their age as they welcome the new year. So technically, a baby is already one as soon as he is born into the world. Now that he thought about it, his guardians told him that this was a tradition from when there was no clear numerical definition of 0. While looking at his calloused hands, he thought about how he'd be turning 9 soon, then resumed tilling the soil. He may be getting older, but a 9-year-old is still a child. Will tilled some more until Marie called him to say that she was done, holding today's produce in a small basket. However, our hero said he'd just take a short break, finish tilling a little later, and continue it after his training tomorrow. Murray took note of that and asked Will if he could hold the basket instead. As he took it, he was surprised to see that there was a lot of lemon balm, leaving Marie giggling and happy that they had an abundant harvest. She's also happy because Blood managed to collect a lot of money the day before so they could use it to pickle the lemongrass. Upon hearing that, Will became excited because that's exactly how he liked it. With that, he looked at the lemon balm they grew with insecticide, along with the thyme, mint, and lavender. As he carried the basket of vegetables in his arms, our not-so-little hero was happy that they had managed to harvest a lot of vegetables. It's like a real-life version of Animal Crossing out there. All these domestic activities, like differentiating between vegetables and herbs, as well as the season to sow and collect the produce, were all taught by Marie to our hero. When it comes to academics, Gus is the one who supervises him, while Blood is the one responsible for martial arts and battle. But out of all the three, Will believes that he learned the most from Marie since she's the one who patiently explains to him whenever there is something he can't understand. She was the only one who did it for him, a person who had zero regard for the lifestyle he lived in the convenient previous world, which made him extra thankful for her lessons. After all, Will was a failure in his past life, so Marie's teaching sure came in handy. And here's the thing about the dignified mummy. She rests and gets up according to a schedule, and she also does a lot of the housework each day. Besides that, Marie is strict when it comes to teaching Will too. While looking at her now, preparing the vegetables she harvested earlier, it made Will think that if she wasn't here now, there was a high chance he would have ended up as a failure again. A little later, Marie turns to the window and notices that it's already that time again while Will looks at her wordlessly. You see, even Marie has a secret of her own. Several times a day, she would lock herself up in the hall of the temple. Right before she enters it, she asks Blood to take care of Will, which the talking skeleton said he would, before the dignified mummy closes the door. Ever since then, our little hero was told that he wasn't allowed to enter the hall during those times, and as a curious kid, that would just make you want to know more about it, right? Maybe not today, because the next thing we knew, Will had just finished his 200th push-up, plopping right into the ground as soon as he was done with it. Blood told him that he had done enough, with Will huffing his breath and pointing out that all they do is weight training. The talking skeleton explains that physical strength and stamina come first, since techniques and such can only be done if there are muscles, so those come in later. While still trying to catch his breath, Will asked if that was really the case, and instead of answering, Blood threw him a question. Can he take Blood down without using magic? Will's answer was an automatic impossible, which just proved Blood's point. He further elaborates that even with an expert's technique, it would be impossible for Will to take him down because of their size difference. There's also their body frame, weight, and muscle strength that all correlate to power. To explain his point further, Blood used a situation as an example. What if there was a skilled fighter who could use amazing techniques? Sure, he could hope to use all of those in battle. But what if he got locked into a lock by his opponent and it became a jostle? Or how about this? What if one gets paired up with someone who excels at using techniques, but the opponent puts some distance between them and gets struck? How useful will those techniques be at that moment? Blood stresses that there are countless situations wherein techniques won't keep him alive, but in almost all cases, having a lot of strength is helpful. It doesn't matter if it's a jostle or a fistfight. If he has a lot of strength, he can hold back his opponent with plain strength, plus the effect of a punch would be considerable. Blood leaned closer and said that with techniques, it will require Will to choose the situation when to use them, and even with weapon techniques, he won't always be guaranteed with his weapon of choice. However, if he continues to train his muscles, his strength will never leave his body. After saying all that, Blood concluded that it should be clear which one Will should prioritize. Listening to the talking skeleton explain all that just made, Will realize that Blood must have thought everything through, which is pretty unexpected of him. If he could show emotions on his face, maybe Blood would even feel appalled that Will thought of him that way, grabbing the little man by his collar while Will laughed it off. We can't blame Will, though. Blood kind of gives off the brawls over brain vibe. Anyway, the talking skeleton wraps it up by saying that if Will can withstand the violence that having strong muscles brings him, then he can settle most things. Our little hero only stared back at him before commenting on how Blood's way of thinking is pretty masochistic. Where's the lie, though? Back at home, when Will relayed this story to Marie, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Giggling to herself, she finally understood why the talking skeleton was so depressed when they got back. Even Will had to admit that Blood was really hurt by what he said, making him wonder if he said too much, but Mary said it was all because the talking skeleton was pretty proud of his muscles. What's more, Marie also said that back when they were still alive, Blood pushed through the demonic beasts and ghosts just by sheer power alone. But our little hero was more interested in these demonic beasts Marie mentioned, and that's when the latter remembered that they hadn't taught him about other things apart from humans. Now that she thought about it, Marie remembered that there was an old encyclopedia in Gus's room, so that's exactly where the two headed. As for Gus, he wasn't exactly thrilled to see Marie and Will enter his room just to search for the book, but his complaints fell on deaf ears. Mary finally found the book and flipped through it, showing Will a picture of a demonic beast, which is a dark mass that's shaped like a wolf or lion. Compared to the other creatures, demonic beasts are pretty aggressive, making Will recall vaguely how the three of them were talking about it when he was just a baby. He never expected them to be real, then proceeded to flip the page and was surprised to see another dark figure. This time, Marie asks him if he learned the myth of creation from Gus, to which he nods before the mummy starts to explain the picture of the dark figure on the page. According to her, the god of creation had created various existences, but each of the evil gods that appeared also created kin from their own attributes. For instance, Iltreat, the god of despotism and tyranny, has ghosts and phantoms, whereas the dimension god Dirhigma has devils and demons as his kin. And lastly, there's also the immortal god Stagnate, who has the undead. Marie explains how the three of them formed a contract with Stagnate with their strong emotions when they were on the verge of death. She says these three are the betrayers of the virtuous gods, then gives a sad smile. Now this made Little Will even more curious. Did something happen? Marie's voice was so sad then that it left him feeling intrigued. As if she heard his thoughts, Marie immediately brightened up and apologized for talking about such a peculiar topic with a child. Well, now that she explained all that, she got up and headed for the door, saying it was time for her to offer her prayers now and urging Will to keep reading the encyclopedia. Our little hero said that he would then continue to read about the evil god, Stagnate. Will thought that he should read more about him since this god was the reason why his undead guardians were the way they were, so he thought he could research more into that. However, Gus stood, or more like floated, on his side and began to explain how the classification of good and evil gods is made out of humans' convenience. Will didn't understand what he meant by that, so this time, Gus told him that he should think more about it. But before he proceeded, he told Will that this conversation should be kept between the two of them. So here it goes. The ruler of the virtuous gods is the thunder god Volt, who governs over order and punishment. He fought over and over against his older brother, Illtreat, one of the evil gods, and ruled over tyranny and despotism. Illtreat was starting to get the upper hand then, but Volt, who was the husband of the gentle goddess of fertility, received her protection and began to counterattack. In the end, Volt managed to defeat Illtreat, so the latter sank to the depths of the earth. This was not Illtreat's end, however, since he ended up spending his time at the center of the earth and started storing up his power. And because the time of peace had long since settled, Volt grew weaker, so Illtreat used this chance to challenge his brother. Now, Gus asks Will if he's aware of the time he's referring to, and the latter thinks for a moment before answering his teacher. Will responded by narrating how violence and tyranny ruled everything at first, but then farming started going well too. As a result, law and order spread throughout society, but as time passed, it crumbled down and a revolution through violence awaited. Gus couldn't believe that Will already understood how the story went, but he continued. Well, it's not surprising for us because we know he has memories of his past after all. But back to the story. Gus said it's just as Will said. However, if one thought about it, the Volt who ruled over that corrupted order would be an evil god, and Illtreat, who had instigated a revolution against corruption, is a virtuous god. In reality, Volt is not slandered as an evil god, and Illtreat is not praised as a virtuous god because, in the end, the separation between a virtuous god and an evil god is something created by their respective believers. Gus highlighted that the gods are different from them. These gods act based on a different set of values than humans, but within their ranks are those who have thoughts and will cooperate closely with humans. These gods will not cause significant harm to society, and they're called virtuous gods. At least, that's what Gus thought. In case you also don't get it, Gus thinks people categorize gods as good or evil if they're willing to help them or they're hurting them. Easy as that. Additionally, Gus said that if he said all those things he shared with Will out loud, then the priests would surely frown upon his ideals. Will, on the other hand, only stared at him and said how the old ghost had some kind of rocky feeling. Now this comment intrigued Gus, so we'll try to explain that it's like Gus has a somewhat unconventional feeling around him. The old ghost mulled about how children would make up the most random words, stroking his chin as he said so, which made Will a bit worried since he thought he said something weird, so he quickly apologized. But the opposite happened. Gus smiled and told him that he liked the sound of that, which further proves that this old ghost is one who didn't conform. Will left Gus's room soon after, and while he was walking down the hall, he couldn't help but muse over how rocky the old ghost was. Suddenly, he heard a door close right when he was about to turn a corner, and immediately hid behind the wall. It was Marie. Will looked again and remembered that she did say she was going to offer her prayers, but it was surprising since this was the first time he had seen her come out of the prayer hall. Looking at her then, he noticed that she was carrying something, a piece of bread on a tray. Now this even got him more curious, because why did she emerge from the prayer hall carrying a loaf of bread? As far as he knew, there weren't any ingredients inside the temple. Again, this got him thinking that whenever Marie retires to the temple, either Blood or Gus will accompany him. Sure, there must be a reason why they told him that the temple was off limits to him. Maybe she just wanted to pray in solitude, but it felt as if there was some sort of complicated reason why this was so. In the end, he concluded that it must be connected to one of the many mysteries surrounding his undead guardians, and technically, there was no reason for him to suspect her. While thinking of all of these, he's pretty sure the bread Marie carried earlier was the kind that Will always ate. and now it made him remember how he questioned him back when he was younger about where she got that bread from. Once again, curiosity got the better of him, which is why he decided he'd just have to confirm this. The next time Marie sets off to offer her prayers, Will tells Blood that he's not feeling well. To make it all the more convincing, he even put on an Oscar-worthy act, saying how it was that the talking skeleton didn't dare question him. Blood took him back and tucked him in bed, never doubting our little hero's act, and Will attested to him acting earnest all the time. But Blood didn't leave his side and waited a little while before deciding to go out and hunt something just so he could cheer Will up. As soon as he left the room, our sneaky little hero got out and took his chance. After all, Gus said he'd be holed up in his room all day, so today's Will's only chance to uncover Marie's secret. He felt bad and muttered a small apology, but in his mind, he couldn't help but think about it. As he opened the door to the temple and peeked inside, Will was greeted with the most horrifying sight he had seen in his life yet. Marie was praying on her knees and burning while doing so. Will was too shocked to react, stuttering her name before he ran straight to her, shaking her shoulders fervently to shake her out of her trance. Despite his rigorous attempt, Marie still wouldn't budge, but Will refused to let go and continued shaking him, never mind the fire that was burning him. The flames still aren't dissipating, leaving Will in a panic about what to do because all he could think about was how she was in danger. He ended up shouting for her to wake up, and the sound was loud enough that Gus and Blood came running to see him still shaking Marie. Marie pulling a Tadashi Hamada on him wasn't exactly on Will's bingo list, after all. A little while later, Marie snapped out of her trance, but the damage was done. Will's hands were burned pretty badly, leaving the mummy so guilty that she couldn't help but cry at his bedside. She keeps saying sorry while Gus low-key scolds Blood for not keeping a close eye on Will. Blood apologized for being careless while Will lay on his bed, hands heavily wrapped in bandages, as he was feverish as heck. Right now, the pounding in his head was too much, with his hands so hot that, ironically, they feel cold right now. Moreover, he could feel the fluids from his burns seeping through the bandages. Meanwhile, Blood asks Gus if there's a chance that Will's hands will recover, but the latter can't give a definite answer. The good news is that at least Will's fingers didn't stick together, but the bad news is that there will be lingering scars. At least it's a good thing they didn't have the technology that required handprints back then, right? Still feeling hazy from all of this, Will turns to Marie and tells her that what happened wasn't her fault, leaving her feeling confused. He admits that it was wrong of him to lie and take a peek during her prayer time. In his mind, he thought that Marie bursting into flames was probably a usual occurrence since she returned to her normal state, and that they all kept it under wraps so he wouldn't worry. What's worse about all of this is how he jumped in and tried to save her even though she didn't need it, leaving him injured and with a lot of lingering scars. He feels bad for causing all three of his guardians trouble, but at the same time, he's thankful that Marie is safe. After all, she's the one who has raised him kindly ever since he was born into their world, and seeing that she's safe was enough for him. With a smile, Will tells her that she didn't do anything that she should apologize for. If anything, he's happy that she's not hurt. On the other hand, Marie was so speechless hearing all of these from Will that she got up to caress his cheek and thank him. With her being so close to him, the familiar scent of incense wafted into his nose, but from the back, Blood suddenly cut them off. He apologized for what he was about to do, forcing Will to listen to the annoying things from now on. But first things first, why did he even go to such length that he fake his sickness just so he could see Marie's benediction? In a small voice, our little hero answered that it was because he has always been curious about the three of them and was about to explain seeing Marie's benediction. But Blood reminded him that he was going to tell him about that when he gets older. What's more, Blood and Will knew that the latter was pretty smart, too smart for his own good, which was why the little man should know that if it's forbidden, then there must be a reason why it was prohibited. Apart from that, Blood still asked if Will had any other excuses, and it was Marie who told him that there was no need to go that far, only for him to shush her. At least Will admitted that it was his fault and that he had no other excuses, and he said he was sorry again. Blood wasn't angry, but he told Will that the next time he wanted to do something, he should discuss it with him or Marie first. As for the punch, well, it would come after the little man's fever subsided. Will instantly groaned upon hearing that, but Blood said something that made him feel better. The talking skeleton told him he did well for jumping in for Marie, and that his burns were a man's badge of honor. Will said it's to be expected since he's Blood's disciple after all, so you have to admit that was very hero-like for our little man. Even Blood had to admit that Will's pretty good at praising people. The latter could only laugh. Cool praises aside, there was one more thing the talking skeleton had to say to Will, though it did come with a warning. He told Will that it may be uncomfortable to hear, but still, he'll use this chance to tell Will that Marie actually bursts into flames and gets the ingredients for him whenever she performs her benediction. Now that came as a shock to Will, who said that he doesn't understand. This time it was Gus who explained that the ingredients came from the protection of the goddess of fertility, Mater. Now this confused Will even more, asking Marie why she had to burn for that. And the latter said that it was because she became undead and betrayed the fertility goddess in doing so. She further elaborates on how the three of them form a contract with Stagnate, the god of immortality, which is in direct contrast in the fertility goddess Mater. Just by touching her divine power, the impure undead will burn. So with Marie being like that, she believed that there was no way she would be forgiven by the goddess. He asks her if she does that just for him. But Marie says it's not like that. Offering her prayers to the fertility goddess has always been her routine in the morning and evening since long ago. However, she admits that she started asking for a bit of food ever since they adopted Will, with Blood chiming in that he and Gus told her that it's enough several times. Gus attests to what she says, so Will could only ask why she does it. Doesn't it hurt? Marie said that it does, so much to the point of crying, leaving Will speechless, even after betraying Mater, and even after she was only repaid with pain. Marie said with a smile that she would follow Mater. Furthermore, she's fine even if Mater doesn't say anything to her because, day after day, the fertility goddess provides bread for them, especially with Will, so she's fine with that already. Clasping her hands together, Marie says that even if Mater doesn't accept her prayers, she believes that they still have meaning. After hearing all that, Will was silent, but Marie continued, apologizing for keeping all of this a secret. She'd be happy if the little man continued eating the bread. Will assured her that he'd keep on eating it, but he had a request, so she asked what it was. Will told her that the next time, she should let him pray with her. His request stunned Marie, but all Will could think about was what Marie had gone through, betraying someone she had devoted her everything to only to be rejected. And what's worse, when she tries to touch them, she gets burned without any compensation. For Will, who has no religious faith, wouldn't understand that kind of suffering, and if he's being honest, he knows it's probably painful and agonizing. As for Marie, she told him that he was welcome to join her next time, making him smile. He knows it's not strange to hate or blame someone, but Marie gently accepts all the suffering. He hasn't seen her resent or blame anyone else, which makes her look even more beautiful to him. With all the things that Marie sees and feels, Will has decided that she wants to understand them, even if it's only a little. It was dark, and like I said in the beginning, being in the dark makes you think about a lot of things. Speaking of thinking, there's a difference between that and being free from thought. To be truly free of thoughts is to focus on the now intensely, at least that's what Will thinks. You shouldn't think about your past or your future, just your current self. You should think about the now and focus, then throw out your very identity, counting slowly, but suddenly, a bell rang a few feet away from him. It was Marie, praising him for finishing the 5 days of silent prayer. We flash forward a bit from the time Will got burned. 5 years have already passed since he gained that Medal of Honor. Now, he stretches his legs a bit and thanks Marie for helping him with the prayer. Will is now 13 years old, but let's talk more about the silent prayer. This is a rite performed in monasteries during the winter for the fertility goddess Mater. During this time, speaking is prohibited from sunrise to sunset for 5 days, with the only exception being in the case of an emergency. So this is basically the shut up challenge in a nutshell? No, but back to the rite. Signaling is done via bells and gongs, wherein most of the time is dedicated to prayer, apart from getting the minimum required sleep. For Will, it makes him feel like diving into the deep depths of the blue ocean. As he got up, he thought about how humans will adapt themselves to many things. It's the opposite of being able to respond to simulation effectively, or it could also be thought of as forgetting your chaotic emotions and dulling your sensitivity. Will got up and dusted himself, with Marie asking if she was too strict with the prayer, but our hero said it was fine. For him, he likes the moment when he gets to open his eyes because whatever he sees or hears feels fresh. This applies to his whole body too, and Marie was pleased to hear that. Marie has been the one to teach him how to pray ever since he was young, but she did it so strictly that now she worries that he will end up hating it. Will assured her that there was no need to worry about that and was about to say something more but decided against it. The dignified mummy already heard the first half of what he was going to say, but when he cut it off, it just left her puzzled. Will thought that the strictest Marie ever got with teaching him was during the rite of silence. As for the rest, she just teaches him how to grow vegetables, sew clothes, and all that domestic stuff, which is a relief for him. For a minute there, I thought he was going to say she was training him to be a house husband or something. Gus, on the other hand, has started to act a bit weirdly since then. This time, the old ghost dumps a pile of books in front of him and tells Will that he should remember all of that by tomorrow night. Will could only answer him with a huh, dumbstruck by his instructions. The old ghost tells him that the test will be the day after tomorrow and reminds him that he shouldn't forget to continue practicing the pronunciation of the words regularly. Of course, Will did as Gus instructed and started poring over the books like a manic scholar. He has to admit, though, that the number of books Gus has been piling up for him is no joke. These titles include geography, history, magic studies, astronomy, architecture, medicine, and even economics. Once these were taught, they would quickly proceed to testing, then back to cramming again. Gus sure puts the cram in cram school, am I right? Will thinks this pacing was just to encourage him to give up. However, Gus' knowledge spans over many subjects and is bottomless. From the structure of the organisms to the methodology of building things, the old ghost instructions are never-ending and practical. It gives Will the feeling that he's learning both from experience and Gus' knowledge. But let's be real here. The situation right now is really just Will desperately trying to hold on to the massive number of tasks to complete. Since he's already said it, this task is just the second weirdest workload because the strangest is definitely Blood's lesson. The talking skeleton tells Will that from now on, he'll be pushing him to some real battles. To which our not-so-little hero answers, huh. It seems like he's been saying that a lot lately, too. At least Blood is a little nice enough to warn him that all the opponents he will be facing will be coming at him with the intent to kill. And there goes Will's second huh. While the talking skeleton assures him that he'll supervise his battles. However, if an accident happens, then Will might die. So like any master, he just tells Will not to die. Gee, now that's reassuring, but Will was speechless and pale, hearing all that. And this time, he gives Blood the loudest huh yet. In the end, Will had the most horrible time. Blood handed him a weapon, and then forced him to fight an inferior undead he caught. Will may be armed, but it was still terrifying for him. After all, in an actual fight, there's some degree of risk that comes with each movement. If he makes a single mistake, like slipping, then he might die, which is not the ideal ending we're going for here. There's more to this story to tell.